Naggy World TV have the baddest reviews them both, yeah. Think alike, subscribe for tune in for the latest vibe. Backlash come, Sklalai Bog, Bututum, Bush.
Hello everyone and welcome to the comment thread, where we encourage you to let your fingers be your voice. The comment thread is a 20-minute podcast aimed at discussing ongoing topics that are constantly on people's lips. One such topic is the Pathways International Kingdom Restoration Ministries, PIKRM, the church and its leader, Kevin Smith. And this is what we are exploring in today's episode. I am Trisha Gay Kelly.
I am Deshane Black.
And I am Andy and Alicia Ricketts.
A warm welcome to all of our listeners wherever you may be joining from.
To summarize the story, Kevin Smith is the leader of PIKRM, which was reportedly conducting bizarre rituals and sacrifices in Montego Bay, St. James. The JCF was notified and observations were done on the building as well as Smith's home. He was being brought to court by a police vehicle to be charged in relation to the two victims of murder who were used as sacrifices. However, in transit, the vehicle met in an accident and he died.
Many stories were published from the PIKRM incident, and as a result, some people were led astray. Our citizen journalists especially played a huge role in the way they delivered these stories as well. In an age where citizen journalism continues to increase, it is important that we know whom and what to follow.
I believe this is why journalists and media entities are known for what they do. They've been here ever since, and they still play a very effective role.
Speaking of citizen journalism, before we even get into the reporting, many of our listeners may not know what citizen and professional journalism are, as well as the difference between the two. This podcast is to educate our listeners of the reporting styles used by citizen and professional journalists and how these journalists can also better develop their skills.
Right. So according to Naggy from MediaUpdate.co, professional journalism adheres to journalistic ethics. These journalists present news stories in an accurate and unbiased manner.
And based on the definition given in the course Web-Based Journalism, we are taught that citizen journalism is participatory journalism, where people, specifically the common man, feels empowered to be involved in bringing knowledge to the public.
Okay, so what you're basically saying is the main difference between the two is that the citizen journalist is untrained, while the professional journalist ensures that the news presented is factual and guided by media law or media ethics.
Yes, Trisha Gay, definitely.
Let's dive right into that.
With us in studio today, we have two very special guests who will help us to understand how the reporting was done for the Kevin Smith story.
We have Mr. Javaughn Keys, a journalist at Television Jamaica TVJ, and Mr. Akeem Freeman, a citizen journalist who is famously known for his platform on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at Naggy World TV, with over 9,000 followers. Welcome, Mr. Keys and Mr. Freeman. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
So,
I'd say the difference is similar to the kinds of differences we see day to day in general reporting, but let's get specific to Kevin Smith. Now, one of the things the citizen journalists tend to, I want to loosely say, get away with is the ability to grab information without verification, putting it out there for an audience to see. Now, that's similar to us in the news media in a sense where you want to get the story out. But the difference for us is that we have to ensure that we verify, cross-check, double-check, triple-check that information, because we are held and governed by certain regulations that require us so to do. So in the Kevin Smith matter, for example, Citizen journalists without verifying where this would have happened would have grabbed videos, for example. Some of them may have sources, not saying that some of them do not, but some of them may have sources with speculation, and they were able to put out this content, put out the information, put out speculation about what the pastor is involved in, what he's doing, whether or not he's involved in certain dealings, put up pictures, for example, of what's alleged to be his house and the cost of the things that he's doing and all of that. However, for us as mainstream journalists, though we may hear this speculation, and I don't want a perception to be painted that we don't work in tandem with citizen journalists, because oftentimes we do rely on them to also provide information to us on what's happening in certain locales. But we have to then further verify that information to ensure that when we put out this content, it is credible, it is backed by the fundamentals of news. So the difference in my mind and in reality is that we have to double check, triple check, quadruple check before we put out content. We don't have the luxury of just saying, oh, we put it out first and then afterwards we retract, because there are consequences to that.
Mr. Freeman?
All right, it was different in the sense that traditional journalists were more professional in the delivery of the whole Kevin Smith saga, while citizen journalists like myself took a more, I won't say unprofessional, but an unconventional route in delivering the story. While the traditional journalists would wait, do investigations, and try to confirm the credibility of the news before breaking it, a citizen journalist harbor and encourage everything being said to sell to the mass, basically.
In that case, then, what can citizen journalists do to ensure that they uphold traditional journalism values while reporting?
I believe that citizen journalists should be more conventional and sensitive in their reporting. It's not always about the views on which media outlet is first to publish, but it's rather about credibility and the integrity of that person breaking the news. Therefore, if a citizen journalist should take this approach, well, traditional journalism will be upheld to a certain degree.
So that fundamentally brings us to the major difference between a journalist in a mainstream newsroom and a citizen journalist. And that comes down to fundamentally training. I would advise any citizen journalist, especially if you're serious about the craft that you do. And I mean, I think the term citizen journalist in recent years has become much broader, because that may also include influencers who from time to time will post content from sources and so on. But the fundamental thing I would advise is that they also try to get training. It may be a short course at an institution. We are in an age now where there are a multiplicity of access points to data and information and certification. So my advice is to, where possible, get certification, do some research in news value, learn about the principles of journalism. How can you therefore become and make yourself much more credible and uphold the values of not just sensationalizing, but getting the facts straight so that you're not misleading the public and putting out misinformation? Because, I mean, you've used the Kevin Smith story as a pivoting point, but truth be told is that the Kevin Smith story is just an example of a myriad of stories across the spectrum being told by citizen journalists that may have speculation surrounding what the facts are and what is true and what is not. And of course, I mean, I'm bringing back the point here that people come to traditional media houses, traditional journalists, to double check what citizen journalists put out. So again, my fundamental suggestion: get some training, do some research, strengthen your skills in journalism.
There is so much that journalists need to do, and it doesn't stop there.
Along with media ethics are news values that all journalists, including citizen journalists, should uphold.
Like not interviewing minors without a parent's or guardian's consent, or even barging into homes after a tragedy to interview victims or affiliated members. We are expected to act with sympathy towards these individuals.
But what exactly are news values? We talked with several journalism students at Northern Caribbean University to get some answers.
One news value is prominence. Now, prominence refers to the state of how important or possibly famous a person might be or an organization, whatever that main factor or element is within the story, how important or famous they may be. Now, readers have an interest in the names of persons whom they are familiar with. So the bigger the personality involved in the event, then you realize that the news value would be greater. And the same thing it is for film stars or politicians, philosophers, even poets. You realize that the more important they are is the greater the news value.
One news value is conflict. Now, conflict refers to the events that include the opposition or the argument between people or forces, and this results in a dramatic effect. And this in turn makes a story newsworthy.
So one news value is impact, right? And impact has to do with the people that are being affected. So the more people affected, the greater the impact. So for example, COVID has impact because a lot of persons are affected by COVID. So because of that, so the greater people or the more people affected, the greater the impact of the story.
One news value is currency. Currency represents what's frequent on the news, what's at the forefront of people's minds, what they want to or need to know more information about.
Okay, so one news value is bizarre or oddity, and what this means is basically, as the name suggests, it is something like a news story or an occurrence or a happening that is bizarre or outrageous or out of place or just, in a sense, just stands out. Now, if you were supposed to Google what this term means, the common examples that you would find, or the common example that you would find is this. If you hear that a dog bites a man, that wouldn't make a story. But if you hear that a man bites a dog, that would definitely make a story, simply because it's odd, or it's not common for a man to bite a dog. So basically what bizarre or oddity is what makes a story stands out or makes a story strange enough to stand out.
One news value is proximity. Proximity is all about understanding the impact of your news story for a given audience. So local information and events are newsworthy simply because they affect the people within the community and region.
Timeliness is one of the news values, and it refers to events that are current, ongoing, or trending, all of which makes a news story relevant.
Those were journalism students from the Northern Caribbean University sharing and explaining the news values that are significant in making a news story newsworthy.
Welcome back to the comment thread. I am Trisha Gay Kelly.
I am Deshane Black.
And I am Andy and Alicia Ricketts.
We are joined by Mr. Javaughn Keys, a journalist at TVJ, and Mr. Akeem Freeman, a citizen journalist. It was T.E. Lawrence who said, "To have news value is to have a tin can tied to one's tail." And Mr. Lawrence, I agree. Simply said, once you have news values, there will always be a reminder when writing stories. Everywhere you go, in everything you do, these values should be behind you, sounding an alarm so that you don't just write any and everything. And as a budding journalist myself, I believe that the news values are low tin cans tied to me that I cannot dare let go of.
With all these news values, journalists also must have integrity. How can citizen journalists build their credibility? Tell us about minimizing harm, seeking truth and reporting it, and also being accountable and transparent.
As it relates to minimizing harm/damage to reputation, many times a story may have different sides to it. And you as a journalist have to exercise a level of discipline and use compassion for those who are affected in not sharing those information because it would be damaging to the person's reputation. It is not the job of the journalist to do undue harm, but to rather protect the people. No one wants to be sued. As far as seeking truth and reporting it, we tend to seek out facts, fact-based information, no deceptive handling of the facts. And being accountable and transparent, being accountable is very difficult for many journalists. they find it hard to say sorry and to admit their mistakes, but we have to be prepared to provide remedies when we get it wrong and do damage.
Listeners, that was Mr. Akeem Freeman, a citizen journalist. We thank him for sharing his advice on how citizen journalists can build credibility. Now we're about to hear from Mr. Keys, a journalist at TVJ.
Integrity is fundamental to journalism overall, because you want to show that what you are doing is truth telling. You are not, I mean, of course, there's a space for inputting personal views and so on. And of course, there are always inherent biases. But the reality is, as journalists, we have to ensure that we are presenting the facts. What are the facts of whatever story we're telling? And building integrity is about establishing a reputation and establishing a track record of truth telling, and consistently so. So what citizen journalists can do to build their credibility is about looking at ensuring again that all their bases are covered. So in journalism, when you have a story to tell, let's say use the Kevin Smith story, for example, and Kirk Wright did that story for us in the RJ Agina group, particularly for broadcast. Kirk would have gotten his sources. He would have gone ahead to liaise with the police. He would have also gone further to get more than one sources involved, people in the community. He would have gone down to the church himself after the incident would have taken place. He would have gone down to get even further information about what is happening regarding his assets. Kirk would have gone to the house with the police to see what is taking place there. So it's about then getting and building that story, having all those facts for people to say that what you are telling is beyond reproach. And when you consistently do that, then you would have built your credibility. You would have built a track record of integrity, because people can now rely on you because you are consistent in getting your facts together to tell those stories in a truthful sense. So building integrity is about ensuring that all your bases are covered, ensuring that you're asking the right questions. You are not tainting information, you are putting out fact, you're not putting out opinion just for loosely putting out opinion's sake, but you are cross-checking, dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's. That is how you build integrity. And that will also help you to minimize harm as well, because you also have the legal implications of when you go off and tell stories without putting facts in place. You will defame people without, if you're not aware of what the operations of the space is and what the truths are. You don't want to put yourself in a position where you have told a story, people have taken this as fact, and you have now reduced beyond the reason of a doubt the integrity of someone, because someone's integrity, and this is not you as the journalist, but the person who you're telling the story on, or persons, you don't want to then put yourself in a position where you have to be trying to know fix reputational damage for other people, because that's a lawsuit waiting for you. So in getting your facts together, you can't go wrong, even if it means that Mary down the road a post on her social media and she get the story out before you. But you, when you've posted that story, you know that you can put your foot down, that you have put all the facts together, and what you have put forward is truth, and nobody can question it.
And just like that, this is the end of today's episode. But before we go, let's recap. We explained what citizen journalism and professional journalism both are, as well as the main difference between the two, which is that the citizen journalist is untrained, while the professional journalist ensures that the news presented is factual and guided by media law. We also tied in how they both played their roles in reporting on the Kevin Smith story and how citizen journalists can improve their reporting skills. We want to say thank you to our lovely guests, Mr. Javaughn Keys, a journalist at TVJ, and Mr. Akeem Freeman, a citizen journalist right here in Jamaica, for making time for us today.
Thank you very much for having me, Mom.
My absolute pleasure. Always happy to have these kinds of conversations. Thank you so much for having me.
And to you, our loyal listeners, for tuning in as well. Join us for part 2, where we'll be exploring the psychological impact that this story has left on many individuals. I'm Trisha Gay Kelly.
I am Tisha Black.
And I am Andy and Alicia Ricketts.
This is The Comment Thread. Let your fingers be your voice.
For the latest loops and scoops, subscribe to Naggy, the Dan Avi. Waklaks come.